Hello, my name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post, but I also happen to be a political scientist that spent his entire life studying Russia, namely Russian foreign policy. And right now, we're at a fascinating crossroads. Russia, realistically, today, is weaker than it has been at any point since the end of World War II. Russia, by no means, is a stable country. As we've seen in the last 3 years of war, Russia, which once was able to claim that it had the world's second greatest army, is in fact not even able to beat Ukraine. Free Ukraine, the part that's not occupied by Russia, only has a total population about 23 million. And yet, for 3 years, it's kept Russia, the world's physically largest country, at bay with its 140 million people, in a remarkable feat. But that really cuts to what's underlying all of this. Russia likes the appearance of strength. Russia likes the appearance of being an equal of other countries, namely the United States. It likes to think of itself as a country that is acting as a counterbalance to American influence. Now, in the Soviet Union, that narrative had a lot more sense to it. Obviously, there was the capitalist world, led by the United States, and there was a socialist world, led by the Soviet Union. But today, Russia offers very little. The fact is, we all know that it is a country controlled by a dictatorship. It is a dictatorship that's actually a kleptocracy. It just steals from its own people and self enriches itself. So, aside from stealing from itself, the way that it maintains the cover of being a normal country and be real competition for the US is that it goes through all the processes necessary to appear democratic. So, Russia has elections. We all know those election results mean nothing. They're determined long before election day. In the same way, Russia has diplomats, which we know are often used for things such as assisting in money laundering, espionage, and other criminal acts.
Dozens of Russian diplomats have been expelled from consulates and embassies around the world following the poisoning of the former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury.
But Russia is another thing. Russia needs, in order to keep up the appearances, support from the West. What sort of support does it need? Well, it needs somebody with whom to tango. In this case, to be treated as an equal in bilateral or multilateral negotiations. So when Russia goes to meet with the United States, it's of key importance for Putin that he's treated like an equal, that he's treated as better than other countries even, and right at the level of being a world power. The fact is, the Putin regime is a dictatorship that's built on quicksand. We all understand the house of cards of Putin can come cascading down at any moment. When you look what's happened in the economic sector, namely that Russia's banks have been supporting the war effort through forced loans that they gave to the government, it's burned a huge hole into them, and they're struggling now with liquidity. But more than that, there's a massive bubble that they've created with giving away government subsidized mortgages. The effect is that the banks, now that the real estate prices have started to collapse, are not able to get their money back from those who borrowed it. As people are more and more underwater on the loans that they took out, they're going to be defaulting. And as everyone remembers from 2008, when the United States had a massive problem with its real estate industry and the toxic loans that were given out, what happens is you don't need a big percentage of people to not repay the loans. It's actually a pretty small percentage. But if it's uniform and it comes quickly, banks have a hard time recovering. And if the Russian government were to try to step in to bail them out, which would be necessary to keep many of the nation's top banks from collapsing, it would contribute to inflation. Real inflation today in Russia, it's over 27%, it's estimated. And if they were to step in now, it would only get worse. So looking ahead, Russia's economic situation is really a mess. But what's more important, perhaps, is what we all see, not just us in the West, but Russia's allies even. Russia, trying to seek to conquer Ukraine for already 3 years, has lost 750,000 men killed or injured. It's lost thousands of tanks. It has lost more tanks than all of the European Union's tanks combined in pure quantity. So, what does it have to do with today? Recognizing that Russia is in a point of weakness, recognizing that Moscow has very few options. Right now is the time we could be putting pressure on Vladimir Putin. He has few other options. He knows he's up against the wall. And if we chose to, we could very readily, very easily arm Ukraine with long distance weapons to keep the Russians at bay, which, even though Ukraine right now is struggling with a lack of soldiers, it would be able to have far fewer losses because it'd be able to attack Russian positions from far away. So, what would that do? Well, it would keep Russia in the corner. Now, think about this. During the length of the Cold War, we spent literally trillions of dollars in order to keep the Soviet Union away. Today, we have the opportunity for nothing. In fact, for the first year of the war, it turns out to be only about 5% of the Pentagon's budget per year that we gave in assistance to Ukraine, the majority of which stayed in the United States. But for that, let's just take that as an example. For that sort of money, we can break Russia forever. And once we break it, it will have a lot of positive effects. Let's think about it this way. Russia is not just a threat because of Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine is a very important issue, but it's not the only issue. Russia is behind a great deal of sabotage, assassinations, and other crimes committed in Europe and the United States. Moreover, we know that Russia is backing illegitimate, illegal regimes, including those in North Korea, Iran, as well as other countries, even in Latin America, such as Venezuela and Cuba, but also in Africa, as we've seen in Burkina Faso, Mali, and other places. Though Assad recently fell in Syria, Russia's influence has not disappeared completely. And Russia is another threat to the United States and Europe for a greater reason. As Russia is sanctioned, it can't do business like a normal country. It can't just transfer money easily. So it has to work with others. Those have a lot of liquidity, those have a lot of cash in order to do business. So think about it. Who else has a lot of cash, but no access to banks? Sure enough, terrorist organizations. The relationship between Hamas, Hezbollah, like with drug cartels, and the relationship with regimes such as the one in Iran, is not by chance. They all have mutual interest. They're in a marketplace of countries that are under the gun, that are underneath Western sanctions. And given the few other options, they do business with each other. They wash each other's money, they sell weapons, they engage in cyber crimes, and they work together globally. There's, in fact, a global mafia working together because they simply have few other options. Let's imagine a scenario where we give Ukraine what it needs to win. Ukraine, in exchange for its rare earth metals, is able to get the weapons it needs to keep the Russians at bay. Russia, at this point, spending more than 30%, perhaps as much as 40% of its national budget on its military, will not be able to keep up for long. This is a game they cannot afford to play. So if we just keep the Russians at bay long enough, they will start to implode. At this point, it's every single day we see on Russian Telegram that there's Russian soldiers on crutches or even crawling who've been injured. They're being sent to the front to go attack Ukrainian positions. Of course, they're quickly obliterated. They serve no real purpose, and they're not even always armed. But that's the state of the Russian military. So how much longer can that continue for? It's not going to last forever. So if we could just keep the Russians at bay for a while longer, we're going to see more and more signs that Putin regime is starting to crumble. However, we could be making a very large strategic mistake right now. Recent news reports indicate that the United States has already begun signaling and even saying publicly that it is willing to give up some of Ukraine's territory. It is also said that it's just simply unrealistic to retain or retake the 1991 internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. Moreover, there's already been talk about the fact of what Ukraine would not be able to keep, what Ukraine would have to lose in order to make peace with Russia. It's just simply preposterous that Russia, the aggressor state, is setting the conditions for negotiations. How is that possible? And why would Russia possibly be deterred in the future from, once again, trying to seize the land of its neighbors? It's a huge strategic mistake. But more than that, the fact is that Russia right now has no other options. We don't need to give them anything. We do not need to concede anything to Russia. We can just promise that we're going to keep the pressure up and make it harder and harder and harder. We can get them so far into the corner that they have no way to get out. We can definitely break Vladimir Putin's back. and allow his military to be further degraded and destroyed, hence taking it off the market as a competitor of the United States for the future. Allowing Putin right now to think that he has an upper hand, allowing him to approach the negotiating table, setting the conditions, is absolutely asinine. More than that, it's a threat to the United States' national security. Russia must leave this feeling that it's lost. Russia must be taken to its knees. Without that, have no doubt, the revanchist attitude of Russians today and the imperialism that just runs so deep at this point in Russian political culture will come back to bite us. The best thing we can do today is back Ukraine. By backing Ukraine, giving it what it needs to win, and taking the restrictions, the absolutely absurd restrictions that we've kept on Ukraine for the past 3 years, and allow it to strike Russia as it well pleases, is the best thing that we can do. Russians must feel that even Ukraine, little Ukraine, is able to bring Russia to its knees, that they do not live in peace, they do not live in prosperity, and in fact, they live in fear and danger due to a country, which is probably a good lesson to learn should Russia think about doing the same thing elsewhere, such as in the Baltic states. So going ahead, what can we expect next? A lot of things could happen, but we can be absolutely certain that at this point, showing any signs of weakness, showing any signs of being willing to back down before the Putin regime will be something that we will regret. The best thing we could do is make Vladimir Putin and his allies understand that we were serious and that we don't give up. We stick with our allies to the end, and that for very cheap, we know that we can destroy Russia. And we don't even have to be the ones that pull the trigger. Right now is a historically important moment for the US and its allies. To let it go to pass, to let it get wasted, due to the desire to get a deal done quickly, is something that we will regret for generations. Now is the time, a historically unique and important moment, where we can truly bring Russia down. And by knocking it down a few pegs, we can be sure that Russia will no longer be a threat for our security, something that will enhance the security of the entire world.